Our next speaker today is William Collier. William is the owner of G.O. Watson, which is the oldest naval architectural office in the world. The company was founded in 1873, and the firm this year therefore celebrates its 150th anniversary. George Lennox Watson designed the King's Britannia, which revolutionized yacht design, and the shape of Britannia really stands as a model for all the boats that we love and sail today. Watson also designed 4 America's Cup Challengers. He was the first in the world with tank testing. And today the office is known for its restoration projects, the archive of William V, and a highly significant collection of Camper & Nicholson. William's life can best be described as a search and rescue mission for the most beautiful boats and most significant boats of the past. Today, William will be reviewing what he has been done in the past to save classic yachts and why, in his view, not yet has been done enough to save them for the future. So without further ado, William, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I very much welcome the existence of this event. I think it's important, and I'd like to congratulate the visionaries who brought this together, but also for their kind welcome. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak here. We are sailors, yacht restorers, historians, and curators. We have a lot in common, but that most likely means that we're also optimists. My core message is that there is still a lot to do, and despite all our efforts in the remarkable resurgence of classic yachts, we haven't done enough. I'll seek to explain this claim from the perspective of my career and the steps that I have taken when time and time again I've realized that my efforts were not enough. A motivation that we all have in common is that we want to see classic yachts saved. Today, that doesn't seem unreasonable, but 40 years ago, my starting point was that I'd missed something incredible, and I just wanted to see those yachts that were left. I was lucky. My grandfather had a pretty good collection of pre-war yachting magazines, and I soon discovered that there were many important yachts in mud berths that I could go and see. I got invited on board and I collected photographs. The image behind you is a pretty typical photograph from the mid-80s of West Mersey, which is on the island of Mersey in Essex, where there was this incredible collection of houseboats. And you can actually, in the jumble, if you can work it out, I think there's 7 individual yachts. And in the foreground, you have Fife's Kismet of 1899. Behind it, more importantly, and still lingering in the mud, is Hotspur, a Michael Ratsey 1874 gaff cutter with her original interior. And for those who aren't familiar with the name of Michael Ratsey, he designed Livonia and Cambria, the first 2 challenges of the America's Cup. So that remains on the list. But moving on. Oh. No? Okay, that's out of order. In the mid-1980s, Altair was restored. It was nothing to do with me, but I read about it like many people in classic boat. For me, it was an absolute light bulb moment. Maybe just instead of seeing the remaining hulls, they could actually be saved and restored, and I could see them as they were really supposed to be, not just sad relics. Then luck played a part, and I got a job at Camper & Nicholson's in Cannes. The venerable firm had grown ignorant about its history, but it was still where would-be yacht restorers went looking for projects, and it just so happened that I knew where all the projects were. So I got involved in salvage operations, got very dirty, did some of the most dangerous sailing I've ever done, and I had some of the best days of my life. This boat is particularly important to me. The man in the foreground is my grandfather, who's a great inspiration. The yacht is Sintra, the gaff-rigged first rule 12-meter, and that's how I found her, with a beautiful superstructure. And you've got to start somewhere, and I'll pay tribute to the previous speaker by saying that I had the great pleasure of chainsawing that superstructure off. And that yacht actually was very important to me because I sold her to Alberto Rusconi, and that was the start of a relationship that took me to Australia to buy Vim for him later, and the start of a whole series of 12-meter projects. But more importantly even than that was that she was a Fife. And unbeknown to me, Albert Obrist, who'd restored Altair, had set himself the goal of saving as many Fife yachts as possible. And when he heard that I'd sold that yacht to Alberto Rusconi, I got summoned for drinks on board Altair, which was like going to the Vatican as far as I was concerned, and sat down and told about his project to set up Fairley Restorations and what he was going to do, and that I was going to be working with him, which was all fantastic. So then a whole series of yachts followed. I'm just going to show you a few examples and fun photographs that you probably don't get to see because we tend to look at them when they're all shiny. This is a Vale, Charles Nicholson, 1896. I used to go and see the old lady who lived on board every year. We had a cup of disgusting tea and we chatted. And there was a sort of agreement that if she ever got too old to live on board, I could buy the boat. And this went on and on and on. And then one year I was racing an Altair, I think it was 1991. And it was the first year that Creole had been restored. And the phone rang, and Maurizio Gucci called to speak to Albert Obrist and invited himself to come and look at Altair. And he said to Mr. Obrist, I went and hid, nothing to do with me. I was just the racing crew. And he said to Albert Obrist, how do you manage to make such beautiful restorations? It took me a long time with Creole, and it's not right, and da-da-da-da-da. And Albert Obrist, a very Swiss, German, pragmatic man, said, I don't know anything about boats, just talk to William. So I met Maurizio, and he said, look, it's really difficult to learn to sail on a 200-foot three-masted schooner. I need a small boat, maybe something like an 8-meter. So I said, okay, I'll think about it. And I got back to the office, and there was a message on my desk. Sadly, the old lady had died, and someone needed to rescue a Vale. So I took the photographs to Maurizio. He understood. It wasn't quite the 8-meter he wanted, but that was a fantastic project. And then, of course, big boats are always more exciting. This is Lulworth in the late 80s, I think, and she was a fabulous discovery. And that was a problematic project because it stopped and started and ended up with a fabulous restoration, by which time I had moved on. But now, sadly, she is no longer in great condition. Then, of course, life gets bigger and airfares get paid and stuff, and then you start wanting to save boats further afield, and you discover more and more. And this is Flicker 2, the 12-meter, which is now living in the Baltic, I believe. But I found her on Block Island at the head of Long Island Sound, and she wasn't really in floatable condition, but we strapped about 10 old ribs to her, towed her to Newport. We literally got into the travel lift before she sank, and brought her back to the UK where she was restored. Then, salvaging boats is not clean and it's not always easy. This is kind of a younger version of me getting very, very dirty under Mariquita back in 1991. And that's Mariquita as we saved her, being loaded on the barge with which she went down to the Southampton area prior to restoration. Then I had to pay tribute to one of my great mentors, Harry Spencer, who worked on all these complicated salvage projects. And that's Harry taking a hose pipe to me, and I am wearing white overalls. During the salvage of Hispania in 1997. It was the last job we did together. And that's Hispania arriving at Fairley Restorations. You can see she's kind of lost her sheer by then. But she's sailing again. And then, talking about dangerous sailing, this is the Lady Anne, the 15-meter class, rigged as a ketch with a beautiful deck house. And we meant to sail her back from England. We set off from near Barcelona, but we had two major fires on the way to Palma, one in the engine room, one in the main saloon. We broke some rigging, and it took us about as long to get to Palma as we thought the trip to England would take us. So I got off there and left it to others, I'm afraid. And then as you do this, you kind of go crazy and you think anything is possible. So this is a 300-foot steam yacht on board a 600-foot heavy lift ship, and that's about as big as I'll ever do. So there we go. But back then, I thought that buying yachts for clients to restore meant that I was saving them. But that wasn't true. The act of salvaging is not saving. And so-called restoration can be the greatest act of destruction. In extreme examples, lines plans are modified, degrading changes are made, and generic fittings replace authentic ones. A really small but actually totally grating example of this was during the restoration of Trivia. I had set up the project back at Camper Nicholson's in the very shed that she was built. But I only went there occasionally because I was based in France. And then on one visit, I discovered that they'd copied the skylight moldings for her from Moonbeam, which was also in the yard. The justification at the yard was they looked really good, but these were Fife details, and they'd put them on a Camper Nicholson yacht. And I was like, you wouldn't put a Rolls-Royce radiator on a Bugatti. What is going on? And my answer is, it's just ignorance. And it was clear that just rescuing old boats wasn't enough. So if you want to teach best practice, you need answers, and you need to have the authority to get them respected. And I struggled with this. The knowledge void was vast, and the time to get all that knowledge was going to take a long time. And in a world that sees yachts as playthings of the rich, how do you make the point that they're valuable cultural assets, as important and as worthy of appreciation as historic homes or cars or great works of art? How do you value the ecosystem of expertise and skills that creates or restores them, and in so doing adds value to our society? How do you give this closed world the value and consideration in the context of economic, technological, and social history? My answer to this set of unreconciled questions was to make the subject an academic one and to seek to obtain a PhD in the history of yacht design and yacht construction. So 3 years and 100,000 words later, I'd gathered an amazing amount of knowledge, and I knew more about the archives of UK yacht design than anybody else. But in itself, that's not really enough. Knowledge is useless if you don't share it. So I wrote a bit, but vital as that is, it's a very hard way to stay alive. More important to me at the time, there were still yachts that I needed to save. But the point remains, if you look on Amazon today, you can find 20 books about Ferrari and just about any other great car maker. And similar situation exists with great architects and artists. But you can only find one out-of-print book on Camper Nicholson's and one on Fife. There's simply not enough sources of quality information to prop up classic yachting. But whilst that is not good enough, we are making progress. Many good books have come out, and we have fantastic biographies of Starling Burgess, G.L. Watson, Tor Holm, Alfred Milne, and these books sell, so I'm guessing people actually read them. And by providing this information, we are not only publicizing our world, but we give it credibility. But we also, importantly, remove the excuse for not knowing better. However, knowledge and the ability to acquire it is still not enough. There needs to be a desire for it, an understanding by yacht owners that they should not feel free to alter an important historic design. More importantly, designers who work on restoration projects need to put their egos to the service of those who created the yachts and not to their own aggrandizement. So to correct what I perceived as an important designer deficit, I decided to challenge the designers. And for that, you need a company, draftsmen, naval architects, a stack of overhead, working capital to make the whole thing work. By nature, you're at a disadvantage because in yachting, design is primarily sold by showmen, so just having the tools is not enough. Early after I set up, I had the opportunity to buy J.L. Watson and Company, the oldest design firm in the world. That was the original logo. Then we were not only trying to rebuild yachts, but one of the most venerable names in the business. But how rewarding this has been. This year, the firm is 150 years old, and I still have a sense of pride and disbelief every time I answer the phone in the office and say, "Good morning, Jill Watson." Is that really me? So we began to make it, to control the process of restoring boats, and doing that, we took our sailing yacht expertise into the motor yacht world, where authenticity is even less highly valued, and we achieved some amazing results, including, and I'm not going to talk too much about motor yachts because I think this is a sailing yacht gathering, but I could talk for hours about them because I think they're equally important. But the most amazing result for me, and will probably always be Narlin, which was the largest maritime restoration project I think ever undertaken in any category of vessel. But then, when you've achieved things like that, occasionally a boat is lost. And for me, the most heartbreaking example in my lifetime was Heartsease, originally Adela. It was an act of complete vandalism. And then more recently, Coral and Halcyon are gone, and with such losses comes a realization that saving and restoring is not enough. Whatever we do, boats have already been lost. Boats have been restored beyond all recognition and will continue to succumb to accidents. To mitigate this, we need to save the archives that record what these yachts are or were. At G.L. Watson, we had a large archive, and we took it in-house, employed an archivist, spent $100,000 on paper conservation, and we achieved something. But then there are other archives at risk. So we intervene either to get them into safe homes or to take them on ourselves. In our case, after the acquisition of the Fife archive, we created a separate company so that we could ring-fence the archives from any commercial risk and have a vehicle which we could eventually pass on to a future custodian. Today, the archive holds the design of about 2,000 yachts, over 40,000 photographs, many models, and all sorts of strange ephemera, down to a pair of lucky socks. So you might start to think, relax, you've done enough. But it's still not enough. None of this means anything if we don't get the next part right. Classic sailing yachts will not survive as things stand today. There is a real chance that all our successes are Pyrrhic. The reason for this is obvious. You simply cannot have a sustainable business model where a yacht owner has to write off 50% or more of their investment. I give you the example of Mariquita. Oops, sorry, archive photographs I've got to show you. That is all the 5 plans. So there's about 650 yachts in those chests. That's just a little bit of eye candy. It's a sail plan for Suzanne, which in my view absolutely must be rebuilt. And that's Mariquita. So Mariquita is amongst the most famous of the big cutters racing today. 20 years ago, her restoration cost between 3 and 4 million. Her annual running costs are around 600,000. And when it came to selling her, it was just unimaginable that the restoration costs could be recovered. It was, however, quite conceivable that it would take 2 or 3 years to sell her, so potentially another 1.8 million in running costs, only to recover less than that. Her owner was a really smart guy, and so he gave her away to a syndicate that would carry on racing her and take care of her. But when they came to sell her, they took her to auction, and she sold for 550,000. We're talking about the largest pre-First World War gaff cutter with a very largely original interior, restored to the highest standards. It's an extreme example, but there are few restored yachts that sell for anything like what they cost to restore. I have a recurring nightmare, and my nightmare is that my life will be circular, and at old age, I will go and see the yachts that I spent years saving and restoring, and again, they're going to be houseboats, floating restaurants, or abandoned. And I just can't allow this. So until we establish real values for yachts, in my view, we haven't done enough. Last year, we held one of the occasional but wonderful Fife regattas. These are familial events of tremendous joy, camaraderie in a beautiful, if sometimes wet, setting. We get a lot of press coverage, and the headline that gave me the most hope was in Monsieur magazine, which is like the French equivalent of the FT's How to Spend It. The headline reads, "Be modern, sail a classic. Timeless elegance that never ages. Better still, with every year, classics gain new fans that are younger, greener, and more chic. Classic yachting has never been so with it." And this matters because classic sailing yachts need to be appreciated on the level of high-value collector items. There's no intrinsic reason why a Ferrari GTO is worth north of 40 million or 50 million. And if that's the case, why are the world's best classic yachts not similarly valued? And I hear arguments about the ease of parking a car in a garage and the difficulties of having a large crew, but I don't really accept any of these. Maintenance costs are not in themselves high, they're just high as a proportion of the low value. As to crew, a good crew is a source of the greatest joy a yacht owner can have, and they really appreciate that. So if values are not high enough to sustain classic yachts and to make them safe, how do we change that? My answer is that we need to make them attractive to a whole new tier of owners who are not so cost sensitive, but who have an emotional response, who see and follow the examples of their peers. To make them see that a classic yacht is not something owned in private by a world of slightly eccentric people like us, but a mainstream object of desire. So what if they're not sailors? Most of the people who originally commissioned the big classic yachts were not sailors. If we look at where classic yachts have come close to thriving today, I think the best examples are probably the 8 and 12 meter classes, where one can potentially anticipate that sustained support may translate into greater appreciation. However, for more diverse yachts, we are lacking in the activity-based focus that these classes have. This is a key motivation for me in creating the Richard Mille Cup, is to create an outstanding event with real races that connect with one of the great traditions, of yacht racing. This year's event will be hosted by 3 English Royal Yacht Clubs, where we will have day racing and passage racing in between, and there will be a final race across the channel to be welcomed in France's oldest yacht club. There will be a meter-high trophy that we've commissioned from Garrett, who made the original America's Cup. It's going to be a sociable event, but it's going to be a real regatta. It will not be held to fill hotel rooms at the end of the summer season. It will be held by yachtsmen for yachtsmen. It will be run using the SIM formula to encourage originality. And at the moment, we have over 15 entries, including Atlantic, Addix, Altair, Mariette, Moonbeam, Moonbeam 4, Mariquita, the Lady Anne, Twiga, and so on. We are going to run the event every year. Next year, we're going to take it to Spain and Portugal. The following year, we're going to take it to the US and hold it between New York and Newport, Rhode Island. We might even come to the Baltic, who knows? And my bet is that every edition will see new owners join the fleet. We aim to make a major contribution to creating an environment that is capable of sustaining the yachts we set out to save, And then if we achieve that, for me, that will be enough. Thank you very much.